You know how public figures often build their entire platforms on these really powerful personal stories of struggle? Well, what happens when those very stories, the foundation of everything, start to, well, change? Today we're going to dive into the controversy around the spiritual teacher Yasmin Mogahed, where a pretty big shift in her personal narrative has a lot of people, followers and critics, asking some tough questions.
And that's really the big question our critics are asking. They've been looking at everything that's publicly out there, her books, her social media, her more recent talks, and they're saying, wait a minute. They claim they've found two very different stories that just don't line up, and it's making them question things like consistency and integrity.
And this right here is the heart of the whole thing. On one side, you have years of Mogahed's own writing about being broken. But on the other side, critics are pointing to what they say is a totally new narrative, one where she was never broken at all and always had support. To really get what's going on, let's first look at the story that built her massive platform. For a long time, the entire foundation of Yasmin Mogahed's public identity, we're talking her books, her lectures, everything, was built on this incredibly powerful story of deep personal pain. And that's the story that resonated with thousands and thousands of her followers.
Right from her own words, she pins down the source of her suffering. This whole idea of anxious attachment, of needing other people and relationships to feel whole, was an absolute cornerstone of her early work. It's the story her audience came to know and connect with.
And she goes even deeper here, tracing these wounds all the way back to her childhood. She even uses that specific term, spiritual bypassing, to talk about how she tried to just pray the pain away without actually dealing with the real emotional problem underneath.
And listen, these themes weren't just mentioned here and there. They were woven into everything she put out there, across her books and countless social media posts. The story was always crystal clear: a broken heart, struggling and wandering, trying to find its way back to faith.
Okay, so that's the story everyone knew. But recently, a completely different story seems to have emerged, and that's what's kicked off this whole controversy. Critics are pointing to what they're calling a total dramatic reversal of the very narrative that defined her for more than a decade.
So, the first big issue they're pointing to is this idea of being spiritually lost. They claim her new story is one where she's had this unwavering faith ever since she was a young teenager, which doesn't quite match the wandering soul theme.
And this feels like a direct contradiction, right? The central metaphor of her entire platform, being broken, is now, according to these critics, being completely denied.
And finally, critics point out that the whole theme of loneliness and abandonment wounds has been replaced with a new story about having a loving family and a strong support system. They argue this isn't just a minor tweak in perspective, it's like flipping the entire foundational story on its head.
This question, which is pulled directly from the source material, really just cuts right to the heart of it all. It basically says, look, these two stories can't both be true. It challenges the logic and really makes you think about the implications either way.
But hold on, because the controversy doesn't actually stop with her personal story. It bleeds over into her professional work, with critics now raising some pretty serious questions about intellectual honesty and where her ideas are actually coming from. So the main accusation is something one critic has dubbed mirroring. The idea is basically this: a public figure sees ideas and concepts that are already out there, maybe from smaller creators, and then they repackage them and present them as their own original thoughts without giving any credit. And the way the critic lays it out, there's this alleged pattern. Step 1, another writer publishes some work on a particular topic. Step 2, a little while later, Mogahed supposedly releases a seminar on a very similar topic. And step 3, no credit, no shout-out, no attribution to the original source is ever given. Now check out this quote. It's from Mufti Menk, a well-known public figure associated with Mogahed. It's a principle they both teach, right? The importance of being happy for other people's successes and celebrating their work. And this is exactly where the critic points out what they see as a major hypocrisy. The public teaching is all about celebrating others, but the alleged private practice is the exact opposite, erasing the work of your peers by mirroring it without giving them any credit. It's a big gap between the message and the alleged actions. So when you put it all together, the questions about her personal story and the questions about her professional work, it all leads to this much bigger, more important conversation about ethics and what we should expect from our spiritual leaders. The source material really highlights what it calls a double standard. On one hand, you have Mogahed, who is said to freely analyze the motivations and inner worlds of other people from the stage, but on the other hand, she allegedly won't engage when people ask direct questions about the apparent contradictions in her own story.
For the people raising these alarms, it really just boils down to these 4 things. Their argument is pretty simple. If you're going to be a guide for others, if you're speaking in the name of faith, then your story has to be consistent, it has to be truthful, you have to be transparent, and you have to be accountable to your audience.
And this brings us right to the final accountability question from the source material, and it sums up the entire conflict perfectly. You've got one story in the books, another on social media, and now a third one in her current claims. It leaves everyone wondering, which one is the real story?
At the end of the day, this is bigger than just one public figure. This whole situation is a case study that makes you think. When trust is built on a personal story, what's the real cost? For the leader, for the audience, and for the message itself when that story starts to fall apart.